Well, hello, everybody. There is always energy here on our weekends on Wednesday service. I want to begin, as I always do, by saying hello to our campuses. So to those of you in Kenosha, we are only a few weeks away from getting into our facility, and so exciting times ahead. Racine campus. I have enjoyed hanging out with you, and will continue to do so. Those of you who watch online in your pajamas, hi. And then always our weekends on Wednesday campus, where everybody is wearing cowboy hats and eating Halloween candy right now. That's what's happening. So here's the deal. If you're just joining us, we are in this teaching series in which we've been talking about the areas of life that we hate losing in. And today we're going to specifically talk about I hate losing my battles. Now, to get us started, we're going to do a little bit of trivia. So, can anyone tell me who the NFL's greatest rivalry is between? Packers and the Bears. This started in 1920s. This is the greatest rivalry in NFL today and has been historically. All right, how about the greatest soft drink rivalry of all time? Coke and Pepsi. Yeah, you've got this down. How about fast food restaurants? McDonald's and Burger King. Yeah, we could literally go all day with this, right? There's rivalries, Nike and Reeboks. You've got Mac and cheese. Mac and PC, Visa and MasterCard. Kendrick Lamar and Drake. Come on, Kendrick Lamar and Drake. And the whole reason that these rivalries exist is because they're entertaining and people want them to exist, right? Rivalries are fun. You've got emotion from both sides. And there's so much emotion that sometimes one of the sides will actually cheat or do something unethical to get an edge on their opponent, right? Like in 1884, when Grover Cleveland's campaign for presidency started to gain some traction, his opponent learned that he had fathered a child out of wedlock. And so they ran an ad with a baby crying saying, "I want my paw." Wow, that's a low blow. Or Thomas Edison, when he felt a little bit threatened because a new form of electricity had come out called alternate current, and he filmed Topsy the elephant being electrocuted by alternate current to try to scare everybody away from this new form of electricity. Of course, many of you will remember how in the early 90s there was a rivalry between some figure skaters, right? Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding, and it got so bad that Tanya and her husband actually hired some guy to come and hurt Nancy and try to eliminate her from the competition. Big news. We hate losing battles, and we hate losing really anything in life. But when it comes to battles, there's all sorts of battles we hate. We hate losing battles with our finances. We hate losing battles in our marriages. We hate losing financial battles or battles with discouragement. And yet most of us, if we're honest, we would say that when it comes to the battles we fight in this life, we lose a fair amount of them. And the reason why isn't because we're weak and it isn't because we're horrible people. The reason why is because we spend most of our time and energy, if we were really to step back and evaluate it, we spend most of the time and energy we have fighting the wrong battles, fighting the wrong kind of enemy. I don't know if you've thought about this for a while, but the greatest enemy in your life is not money. And the greatest enemy in your life that you fight is not time, and it's not some sort of addiction that you're battling. Right? Those certainly can be enemies, but the biggest enemy in your life is something different than that. Believe it or not, the biggest enemy in your life right now is not a person. Right? It's not your mom or your dad who've got really strict rules for you to follow. It's not your rebellious teenager who doesn't like to listen to a thing you say and is super independent. The biggest enemy in your life is not a coworker who gossips about you. It's not some boss who's overly demanding. In fact, back in the first century, the Apostle Paul writes a letter to followers of Jesus, and he makes this very strong statement. He says, we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies. So the biggest enemies that we fight in this life are not people. The biggest enemies we fight are the issues that are hidden deep inside of our hearts. Not our physical hearts, but that invisible part of us that philosophers and poets and songwriters refer to on a regular basis. Right? Our heart is that part of us that allows us to love and to laugh or to be afraid. It's that part of us that allows us to experience life and relationships. And I think it's important that we pause here for a moment so that I can be very, very clear with you on this. I don't want you to misunderstand. Your heart is not the enemy. My heart is not the enemy. What's hidden inside of our hearts is the enemy. And the challenge is, most of the time, we're not even aware of what's hidden in the deep, dark places of our heart because we don't really look for it. We don't pay a whole lot of attention to what's happening on the inside of us. I think most of us would agree that growing up, we were taught how to spend a whole lot of time focusing on what's happening on the outside of us, right? Our behavior. We learned very early on that if we could learn to monitor our behavior, we could avoid a whole lot of trouble. So I know some of your parents were old school like mine, right? They believed in spanking. Because I love you so much, right? Right, some of you, your parents, they grounded you from TV or from video games or from hanging out with your friends because they wanted to teach you a lesson. One of the rules that my parents had growing up that I still think to this day is one of the dumbest rules any parent can have is that my brothers and myself and my sister, we were not allowed to ride the Demon at Six Flags Great America because of the name. All right, just ridiculous. And around 15 years old, I decided I was going to defy my parents. I was going to be independent. Nobody was going to tell me what to do. And so I rode the Demon. And I was getting off the Demon. And as fate would have it, I mean, my parents must be praying at home somewhere because my brother Todd, who's a year younger than me, saw me getting off the Demon. And if there's one thing that younger brothers like to do, it's what? Tattle. Tell on their older brothers. And that's what he did, and as you can imagine, my parents were not happy. And, of course, I came up with every excuse I could think of. I said, Mom, it is not called the Demon. It is called the Demon. You do not pronounce it correctly. All right, and then I really started calling out her hypocrisy because I know my mom made and ate deviled eggs all throughout the year on different occasions. I said, all I did was sit on a demon. You put the devil in your body, you hypocrite. But it didn't work. I was still grounded, and sure enough, never rode the Demon again as long as I lived in my parents' house. Since then, I've rode it many times. In your face, Mom and Dad. All of us have stories of how at one time or another our behavior was modified because of pain or because of embarrassment or because we had our privileges revoked. Right, a few weeks ago, I was sitting in my backyard with a buddy of mine. The fire was on. My wife was back there with us. And somehow the topic of marriage gets brought up. And my buddy genuinely wanted to know, like, hey, how are you guys doing? How are you guys interacting with each other? And I said, honest to God, Tom, I have learned to tame my emotions. I'm probably one of the most even-keel husbands around. Now, I believe that. I said, I haven't always been that way. Thank God for medication. I said, I'm pretty, even-keeled. And I said, Rindy's here. Rindy, would you agree that I've done a good job at learning to control my emotion? I'm pretty even. And she says, yeah, I actually do agree with you, Dave. And then she paused and she said, and now would probably be a good time to tell you I got a speeding ticket 2 weeks ago. And that is the truth. Now, why in the world would a police officer hand out a ticket to someone who's going 10 or 15 miles over? Or in my wife's case, 30 miles over. Because they know that a fine will somehow modify your behavior. And here's the deal. I think all of us have gotten pretty good at it, right? I can do really good at controlling my behavior, but it doesn't mean that my heart is doing okay. It just means I got a good filter. I mean, as a pastor, I'm pretty aware of this. If I don't control my words or my actions, guess what? I'm going to lose my job. I know that. You know that too. Many of you are in jobs where you got to be very careful what you post on social media. I know all of us, because we want to keep our job, we don't speak every one of our thoughts that we have about our boss to our boss. Right? We pretend to like some people we don't like. We laugh at jokes that we don't even think are funny. over the course of our life, most of us develop pretty decent filters, and that's a good thing. Fact is, you shouldn't disclose everything about yourself on the first date. Right? When you're in a job interview, you shouldn't talk about all the issues you have in your life and all the problems going on in your family. It just shouldn't happen. Truth is, if we didn't have filters, none of us would have a job, and we'd have no friends. But filters aren't enough. Because at some point along the way, I'm going to say something or I'm going to do something that's just going to push past the filters I've established in my life. All right, at some point, I'm going to say or do something that doesn't match the person that I've convinced myself I am, or I've convinced all of you that I am. Plain and simple. And in those moments, I'm going to be shocked and I'm going to say, whoa, what just happened? That's not like me. I don't know where that came from. I don't know why I said what I said. I don't know what I did. It's the reason why almost every single time someone is convicted of a really big crime, when their family or friends are interviewed, they say one of two things. Either A, it's impossible. They did not do it. We know them so well. It is out of their character. It is impossible. They could not have done that. Or B, they say, we believe they did it, but we don't know how it's possible. Like we believe based on the evidence that, yes, they're guilty, but man, it's just, we never saw it coming. Because we've done such a good job on working and caring about the outside of our life. We know how to monitor our behavior, but we're not really good at monitoring what's happening on the inside. And that's why Jesus taught the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart. What? All right, let's just, real quick, time out here. What do you mean they come from the heart? That doesn't make sense. The reason I said what I said or I did what I did is because of what they said or they did, and I was responding to them. It's their fault. And Jesus will say, no. The reason you said what you said or did what you did is because there's something in your heart that you didn't even realize was there. So what happens is when you're going through life and you bump up against somebody and things come out of you, and you say, well, that's not like me. I don't know why I said what I said. I don't know why I did what I did. It's their fault. When we bump into temptation, when we bump into people, when we bump into circumstances in life, and we say, man, why did that happen? Just, I'll tell you why it happened. Because there's stuff on the inside of you that you don't even realize is there. You're not paying attention to it. And so Jesus pushed his audience a little bit on this issue. He says, for from the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all sexual immorality, theft, lying, and slander. This is so irritating because we're like, man, Jesus, I'm not like that. I'm actually a good person. And Jesus said, no, you're an evil person. You've got some things in your heart that you're not even aware of. I mean, I read a statistic this week that 70% of men and women admit they would cheat on their partner if they knew beyond a shadow of a doubt they would not get caught. Almost 50% of people admit they would murder someone if they knew they wouldn't get caught. So that's either you or the person sitting next to you. Listen, the biggest enemies in our life are not people, and they're not finances, and they're not addictions. Those are enemies, but they're not the biggest enemies. The biggest enemies in our life are hidden in the deepest, darkest places of our heart, which is why one of the wealthiest and wisest people who ever lived, King Solomon, third king of Israel, he writes this. He says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Think about this. All of life comes from the heart. We parent from the heart. We manage money from the heart. We do marriage from the heart. We lead from the heart. We make decisions from the heart. And this ought to concern all of us. Because all through life, things are happening on the inside of us that we're not even aware of. Things are building up around our heart, and they're getting into the dark recesses of our heart, and we don't even realize they're there. Words that were spoken to us as a kid that we thought, okay, I'll move past that. Betrayal we've experienced. Hurt we've gone through. Disappointment, discouragement, shameful things that have been done to us, shameful things we've done to others, secrets that have built up around our heart. And here's the deal. These issues, if they are not addressed, will eventually push past the filters of behavior that we have established in our life, and they will wreak havoc on everyone around us. Growing up, we used to have mulberry trees in our front yard. Okay, so I grew up here in Kenosha, Sheridan Road, 42nd Street, had a couple mulberry trees in the front yard, and I love mulberry trees, right? I love mulberries, I love how they taste. But at some point during the season, these trees would start to drop mulberries everywhere, and they would just create a really big mess. And most of the time, we just ignored the mess. They just stayed on the sidewalk or the grass, and we didn't really think much about it. But there were times that we knew we just had to get out there and clean it up, so we would do it. Regardless of whether we ignored it or picked them up, the issue was never permanently solved, this mess that mulberries would create, until my dad decided it's time to take down the trees. And so he took out both of the trees and dealt with the real issue. And that's what we need to do with the core issues that that live inside of our hearts. Several years ago, one of my favorite communicators of all time, we actually listen to him give talks regularly around here, Andy Stanley. He wrote a book called Enemies of the Heart. And in the book, he identifies 4 key issues that almost every single one of us has lurking somewhere in our heart, whether we realize it or not. The first one is this: guilt. Guilt is what you and I experience when we have this sense that we owe somebody something. Guilt says, I owe you. Okay, maybe you're a perfectionist and you try your best to constantly you constantly give the extra energy and the extra effort, but you constantly feel like you fail people, like you fall short. For whatever reason, you feel guilty, like you're not doing everything you could do, even though you're saying you're pushing yourself, right? You just kind of feel guilty for whatever reason. Or maybe you hurt someone in some way and you can identify something you said or something you did and you feel guilty because of it. It's not a bad thing. Sometimes guilt is a good thing. Maybe you feel guilty because you had a parent or you had a religious leader in your life who used guilt as a controlling mechanism to get you to do what they wanted you to do. If that's your experience, I think it's important for you to know that you're not going to see that happen at Great Lakes Church. Right? If you're waiting for us to just throw a bunch of guilt on you, it's just not going to happen. And the reason why is because if you read through the stories of Jesus, you're going to find that he never leveraged guilt on anyone. Okay, he was not a dispenser of guilt. He never used guilt to manipulate people into getting them to do whatever he wanted. And he could have. I mean, Jesus knew the heart of everybody, so he could have just looked around and said, guilty, guilty, I know you're guilty. I know what you did last night, guilty, right? He could have, but he didn't deal in the currency of guilt. And the reason why is because most of the time, the people who deal in the currency of guilt are guilty themselves. And it's just kind of this cover-up. And they like to point the finger at others to get the attention off of themselves. God does not guilt you into changing your life. What he does is he overwhelms us with grace. That's why the Apostle Paul asked this question. He says, can't you see that God's kindness is intended to turn you from your sin? Guilt says, I owe you. I did something wrong. I said something I should never have said. I promised you I would, and I dropped the ball. I said I'd never do that, and I did it anyways. And now I owe you something. Guilt creates this debt-to-debtor relationship. For those of us who have guilt somewhere building up in the dark recesses of our heart, I think we could be really candid about it and say it creates an awkwardness. Right? If you owe somebody something, you owe somebody an apology, or you owe somebody money, or you owe somebody at some level something that you have not repaid, when you see them, you don't make eye contact with them. Right? If somebody owes you a few $100s from years ago, they're not calling you up when they have that money, right? They feel awkward. They feel dumb. But if we wanted to defeat the guilt in our life, if we want to win the battle against guilt, here's what we need to do. We need to confess. Because I defeat guilt whenever I choose to confess, whenever I choose to talk about it. Now, as followers of Jesus, we're really good at confessing to God and saying, oh, I'm forgiven. And that's true. God does forgive us. But the reality is this. As followers of Jesus, if we want genuine healing in our life, we need to learn to confess to one another. We confess to God for forgiveness, but we confess to one another for healing. James chapter 5, verse 16, confess your faults to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. If I wronged you, the only way that our relationship is going to be reconciled is if I talk to you about it and I confess my wrong to you. The first enemy that lurks in our heart is guilt. The second enemy that lurks in our heart and needs to be defeated is anger. Anger says, you owe me. Anger is what you and I experience when somebody has wronged us in some way and we want them to make it right. So we know that we worked the hardest and we deserve the promotion, but we were overlooked. We get angry. Somebody talks to us or treats us in a disrespectful way, we get angry. We have a parent that cheated us out of a childhood. They walked away from our family. We get angry. They owe us. We're taken advantage of by another person. We get angry. Anger is what we experience when we don't get what we want or we don't get what we think we deserve. And the truth is, often when we get angry, it's justified anger. We should be angry. They should pay us back. But the reality is this. If I don't deal with the anger in my heart, eventually it's going to make its way out in a really ugly form. It's going to get past the filter in my life. And so I need to deal with the anger. If they never pay me back, if I never get the promotion, if they never say I'm sorry, I need to deal with the anger in my heart. I need to defeat it. I need to go to battle against it. And the way I defeat anger is by choosing to forgive. I defeat anger whenever I choose to forgive. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness does not mean trusting. Forgiveness does not mean that I don't hurt on the inside anymore. Forgiveness simply means I've decided I am not going to retaliate and I'm not going to take vengeance into my own hands. I'm not saying the legal system won't get involved, but I have chosen I am not going to retaliate and repay you and try to get even. In the first century, Paul writes this to followers of Jesus living in Colossae. He says, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Enemy number one is guilt. Enemy number two is anger. Now, there's a third enemy that lurks in our hearts that's very easy to overlook. Hard to even notice it's there. But we need to go to battle against it, and it needs to be defeated, and that is greed. Greed is living with the assumption that my life is primarily about me. Greed is this idea that I owe me. I owe it to myself to take care of myself, to protect myself, to prepare for the worst in life, to get ready for retirement. I owe me so much. Now, the interesting thing about greed is it is so difficult to see in ourselves, right? I can see greed in everybody else because I can look at someone and say, man, they're reluctant to share. Yeah, they give of themselves a little bit, but man, they always make sure you know that they're giving, and it's like they're going to hold it over you for a long, long time, right? Greedy people are people who don't like to express gratitude. Like, it's really difficult for them. They're people who never seem to be content with what they have. And the thing about greed is it's way easy to see in you, but it's very difficult to see in myself. Because when I look at myself, I just say, well, I'm just being careful. I'm just preparing for a time. I'm just being ready for the emergencies. And so I can walk through life tight-fisted, not even realizing that I'm greedy because I justify it and I excuse it. This is why Jesus warned us. He says, beware. Guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. The issue with greed is that it causes us to equate our life with how much stuff we have. Now, sometimes greed is fueled by pride. And that's often what we assume. Well, the reason they're greedy is they're just really proud. But the truth is, most of the time, it's fueled by fear. Fear of missing out, fear of not having enough, fear that the economy is going to change. Regardless of the reason that greed finds its way into my heart, I need to deal with it. Because if I don't, it's going to affect me. It's going to affect my happiness. It's going to affect my level of gratitude and contentment. It's going to affect how I interact with other people. And so I need to battle against it. And the way that I defeat the greed that builds up in my life is by developing the habit of generosity. I defeat greed with habitual generosity. Generosity doesn't happen by accident. Nobody makes a mistake and says, oh, I guess I'm generous. Right? Generosity needs to be built into our life. It needs to be a plan. It needs to be thought through. It happens through consistency, which is why we regularly teach at Great Lakes Church that if this is your church, you need to develop the habit of consistent generosity. That whenever you receive a blessing from God, meaning a weekly paycheck, a monthly paycheck, that you just build it into your life and into your discipline. I'm now going to give back to God. And if you say, but I'm not a follower of God, and this is the kind of stuff that gets me irritated, and this is the stuff that gets me all cynical, I'm going to say to you, you need to be habitually generous, but just do it to a charity. If you don't trust the church, then give to a charity, but learn to go through life being habitually generous, because without even realizing it, greed will begin to build up in our heart. So enemy number 1 is guilt. Enemy number 2 is anger. Enemy number 3 is greed. And the fourth enemy that lurks inside our heart and needs to be defeated, we may not even realize it's there, but is jealousy. Jealousy is this belief that God owes me. Right? God owes me a different body. God owes me more talents. He owes me a greater personality. God owes me more opportunities. God owes me a nice career. God owes it to me. See, here's the deal. When we're jealous, we tend to think that our issue is with the other person, but really our issue is with God. Because if we're honest, God could have given us a better body. God could have given us a better personality. He could have given us more discipline. He could have given our kids way more intelligence than He gave them. He could have given us better athleticism in our bodies. God could have stopped the divorce from happening. He could have intervened and healed your child or healed your parent. God could have done all of that stuff, but He chose not to. And so we step back and we say, well, that's not fair. And our jealousy is rooted in this idea that we think everything in life ought to be fair. This is why James, the half-brother of Jesus, writes this. He says, for wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. Gossip is rooted in jealousy. Harsh words, murder, bitterness, rooted in jealousy. Lies, insecurity, rooted in jealousy. Jealousy leads to evil of every kind, which is why we need to deal with it. But the reason we often don't deal with it is because we don't think we have it. Because it just kind of feels like something that a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old would deal with on the playground, and we just kind of feel stupid saying, yes, I'm jealous. And so when we experience these feelings of insecurity, we feel bitter about something. What happens is we just kind of point our fingers in another direction, or we do whatever we can to take the spotlight off of our heart and shine it in a different direction. And we just start saying things like, he's too nice. He grew up in a bubble. Nothing bad's ever happened to him. Oh, geez. His whole life he's been fed with a golden spoon. I mean, his whole life's just been handed to him on a silver platter. Yeah, hey, I'll admit she's pretty, but she's too pretty. She's plastic. She paid for everything. She's fake. Right? The only reason she got promoted, she flirts with the boss. I'm way more qualified than she is. And here's the deal. Jealousy causes me to be resentful of God's goodness in another person's life. And it causes me to overlook God's goodness in my life. And so the way that I deal with jealousy, the way that I go to battle against it, the way that I defeat it, is by learning to celebrate the person I envy. I defeat jealousy by celebrating the person I envy. Don't miss this. Ridding my heart of jealousy begins with this recognition. The reason I resent that person has nothing to do with that person. It has everything to do with me. Jealousy is broken when we celebrate the people we are jealous of. Jealousy is broken when we write encouraging notes to people, when we make congratulatory phone calls. It is broken when we choose to be positive and to pray for the success of that person that we envy. That's why the Apostle Paul in the first century writes this to followers of Jesus living in Rome. He says, be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. Be happy with those who are happy. That's not easy. All right, let's just be honest, man. That doesn't seem like it's even a remote possibility. But you have to do it if you're going to defeat jealousy, if you want your heart to be healthy. I don't think any of us have a clue at how unhealthy our hearts are and how affected they are. But it's when we bump into temptation, it's when we bump into people in our life and we say, they make me so mad. It's when we go through events in our life that things come out of us that we don't like, that we realize, there's something in there that needs to be taken care of. And so I just want to close with this thought, that regardless of how damaged your heart has become, it is possible to have a healthy heart. A few thousand years ago, God made a promise to a group of people who had a whole lot of issues built up in their heart. And the promise he made to them and the commitment he made to them is, he said, I am committed to making you new. He said, and I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit in you. I will take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. God wants to give you, and he wants to give me a new heart. The question is, do you want a new heart? It starts by monitoring and paying attention to what's going on in the inside, and then doing something about it. The big idea of this series is that people who win know when to lose. People who win know when to lose. If you want a healthy heart, you need to be willing to lose your guilt by confessing to the person or confessing the issue that you're guilty about, right? If you want a healthy heart, you need to deal with your anger and be willing to lose your anger, and you do that by forgiving the person who's hurt you. You need to be willing to lose your greed, and you do that by being habitually generous. And then you need to be willing to lose your jealousy, and that's by celebrating others. Don't go through your life pointing your finger at everyone and blaming them. Shot through the heart, you're to blame. You give love a bad name. It's you. No, it's not you. It's in us. Heavenly Father, I pray that each of us would have the wisdom to know what issues have built up in our heart that maybe we're not even aware of are there right now, but they're affecting us and they're building up. And in the weak moments of our life, they're going to push through those filters. Give us the wisdom to be able to identify and know what those issues are, and then give us the courage to do something about it. In Jesus' name, amen.